Okay, welcome everyone. It looks like we have some participants that have loaded, so we'll get started. Welcome again to the Wintergreen Studios 7th Annual Land Art BioBlitz. You have arrived at the session Wild About Pollinators. And thank you so much for being here. So my name is Rosie. I'm the coordinator for the BioBlitz event this year. With us, we have Monica and Rena, as well as Alex Pedersen. So I'm happy to welcome Alex as an avid beekeeper and a board member of the Limestone Beekeepers Guild. She has taken courses in apiculture at the University of Guelph's Honeybee Research Center as an undergrad, and today she and her partner keep hives north of Kingston to collect honey and other hive byproducts. So Alex loves to talk about bees and honey and the importance of pollinators for food production and environmental sustainability. So she has generously agreed to share her knowledge about pollinators with us today. Okay, so I will now hand it over to Alex.
Thanks so much, Rosie. I'm super pumped to be here today to talk about one of my favorite insects of all time, the honeybee, as well as their cousins and friends in the bee yard, the other pollinators. So I will share my screen and get us started here. Is that looking good for you? You can see the full, excellent. Thank you so much. All right, well, let's be wild about pollinators. We'll do a little bit of a focus in on the honeybee, seeing as we have a wonderful apiary up at Wintergreen Studios that I think we can focus on a bit. But I think we can also talk a little bit more broadly about our ecosystems, the importance of pollinators to us as humans, as well as the broader ecosystem and environment, and thinking about how we can become involved in supporting those pollinators and ensuring that they have a healthy and happy environment, because we will too if they're happy. So as I move along in the presentation, we'll see if I can get the slides to change. And I thought we'd start off a little bit first about some terminology with bees and what is beekeeping or apiculture. And that is the maintenance of maintenance of honeybee colonies, commonly known as hives, by humans, right? So we've been doing this for a very long time, and honeybee keepers today work with the European honeybee, or Apis mellifera, because they are a phenomenal insect for storing a large amount of honey, which is what we as people look to for those bees as a product. In addition to wax and propolis and pollen, other types of products that come out of the bees and the colonies as well, but we really do focus on the honey production as beekeepers. But the beekeeper, whether you're calling them a beekeeper, can also be called an apiarist. So someone that collects bees and honey and beeswax, keeps the bees to help with pollination of crops, something like almond fields, strawberries, lots of the foods that we see in our grocery stores or in our own home fridges. And then we also use honeybees for the production and sale in and amongst our own honeybee economy. And so we apiarists practice apiculture within an apiary, and an apiary is the location of which a beekeeper houses their hives. So lots of different terms around apiculture, apiarists, and apiaries. So we can get some of that scientific knowledge in and amongst our regular vocabulary. I'm sure we'll be impressing some of our family and friends. This is a picture of the wintergreen apiary, known as the 9th Meadow Apiary. You can see the main wintergreen building off in the distance. And then we have a fence out around our particular 3 colonies that are here today. So if the chat was on, I'm wondering if anyone knows why we have a fence around the bees. What is the purpose of that fence? Anyone? Can anyone tell me why we have a fence? Thanks, Monica. Yeah, feel free to answer in the chat. What's the purpose of the fence? Oh, I see in the Q&A, Arthur says bears. Yeah, Arthur's right. Bears are one of the many large animals that we're trying to keep out of the apiary. Yep, as well as other animals, right? So skunks, raccoons, possums, large animals like bears, even deer might mistakenly wander into an apiary, and they're large enough animals that we want to keep them out. Bears, possums, raccoons, they love honeybee brood or baby bees as a source of protein. Even though we see in cartoons that they're really interested in the honey, it's not as interesting to them as the protein-rich baby bees and bee colonies that are there as well. So we try to keep these bees safe by putting in an electric fence. And although I see that we have a comment about, so that people don't get too close, you're totally right. We don't want people to just accidentally stumble upon these bees, but we can also do that with signs. And I know that you can hear the bees as you're approaching them. So it's mostly about keeping animals out. All right. What you saw in the last photo that we are using Longstroth hives, and these are a perfected hive that have been developed by scientists over many, many years to look at, to create a space that the honeybees actually know and love. And so decades ago, scientists put together different sizes of box, different shapes of honeybee colonies, and tested them out in an apiary to see what size and shapes, just like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, what size and shape do the bees love the most? And the scientists discovered that they loved the design of the Longstroth hive, which is a box shape that has 10 frames in it and can be layered upon layer high with special boxes just for honey. So in the summer months, these particular beehives can hold as many as 50,000 to 80,000 bees, depending on how strong the hive is. The worker bees that work in this colony can collect nectar from up to 2 million flowers to produce just 1 pound of honey, right? So these boxes are specially designed to have both the storage for the honey as well as production of new bees for the colony to survive. And so right now we might see only about 20 to 30,000 bees because we're still in the spring months, and it takes a little while for the colony to develop the numbers that they need to pollinate flowers in the summertime. But we'll see them explode to that 50 or 80,000 bee population by the middle of the summer. And you can definitely hear them buzzing in and amongst the meadows at Wintergreen Studios as well. The average worker bee will produce 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey in her lifetime. So, the optics and the range here of the number of bees to how much honey they can produce to how much one little bee can produce as well is really amazing when you do the math about it. They're really mighty little insects, but they can produce a lot when they come together. But every year that beehive could produce up to 100 pounds of honey. So we have 3 hives right now at Wintergreen. And I think if we're lucky, one day we're going to get those colonies to each get up to about 100 pounds each. And then we'd have 300 pounds of honey to share with our friends at Wintergreen. So we are looking to increase the amount of honey that we have over the years, but that really takes a lot of effort from beekeepers to make sure that the hives are healthy and the environment is healthy around the bees, and then they can do the hard work of building the colony and getting that honey. So I've done a little bit here for you to see. I'm going to turn on a bit of a video here as well. I've got signs pointing to the different parts of that Longstroth hive, as well as to show you where the bees actually come in and out of the colony. So let's have a quick look here. Whoa, look at those bees. Now they're in slow-mo for all those folks who like that. I always think of them as like flying little fairies as they're coming in and out of the beehive. But as you can see at the top of the beehive here, where there's a little bee sitting, that's one of the top entrances. So they have the ability to come to and from underneath that roof. But they can also come out of the bottom here at the bottom entrance, which is the typical highway of them coming in and out of the colony when they come back full of nectar for honey production, or if they have pollen sacs that they've brought in from pollinating flowers that they're going to turn into protein to feed baby bees. So these are the different areas too. You can see the difference of the size of the honey super. It's a little bit smaller because it's just jam-packed with honey versus the larger box at the bottom where all of the bees live and raise new bees. There it goes. All right. Oh, so here I have another fast timeline lapse. I've actually had Monica and I a couple of weekends ago out working with one of the bees that I wanted to show you, one of the hives. And what I love about this, when you watch it, you can see the bees moving all together across the hive while we're working. Let's watch this. I think we were in this hive for about 20 or 30 minutes, but this is just the process of what a beekeeper might do on a regular check to go through the colony, to go through the hive in each one of those 10 frames and have a look. And in this particular exercise, Monica and I are looking both for the queen, which we'll have a little bit of a game with in the future, but also for signs of health in amongst the colony. Whether or not new bees are being born, do we see new eggs being laid? Is the colony operating efficiently? Are they building comb in places where we don't want to see it? So every time a beekeeper goes into a colony, they're doing an assessment on those bees to ensure that they don't need to do any intervention to support them. All right. Here's another one. A little faster on this one going through. You can see lots of bees. Most of them start flying around once we start poking in there, but both Monica and I are also wearing a few things that we'll talk about, and we're using special tools as beekeepers as well. So you'll notice that we're wearing a lot of equipment, and different beekeepers will wear different things, but it's important to recognize why we wear these particular suits and maybe the supplies that we're using as well. So here, honeybee beekeepers use a smoker, which helps to calm the bees when we are working with them. So we fill the smoker with leaves, pine cones, all natural materials that eventually we light on fire and start a small smoke fire within the repository of the smoker itself. And then we smoke the bees very gently when we first open the hive to trigger them to think that we are to trigger them to think that there's actually a fire. And what they do is they gorge themselves on honey to eventually think, if my house is on fire, I have to relocate my most precious items. And to bees, honey is the most precious piece. And so we often see the bees put their heads face down into the comb to slurp up as much of the honey as they can. And when they are so engorged with honey, they become so fat with honey, they're not able to sting as easily. And so one of the other things that we wear as beekeepers are veils or suits, because we don't want to be stung in the face. Bees are naturally defensive. Oh, and I'm seeing I must have a timer, and I apologize. I keep moving my slides forward inadvertently. So I'll try and combat this. We often try to get those bees as calm as possible to make sure that we don't get stung when we're working with the honeybees. But that does happen as a beekeeper, and bees don't want to sting you unless it is absolutely necessary, but it's definitely part of the beekeeping process. Personally, when I get stung, I actually swell up really badly. I'm not fully allergic to bees, but I definitely have a few days afterwards where if I get stung in the hand, my one hand might be twice the size of the other ones, and I have trouble writing or typing. So I wear gloves, I wear a full suit because I don't want to have expanded hands or feet from those stings. But I know other beekeepers, some of them don't work with masks because their bees are really docile, or they only work with a veil and they will work with their bare hands as well. And that's something that I would love to get to one day if I didn't swell up so much. It's also good for hygienic purposes not to work with gloves or too much material, because if one honeybee colony is sick or it has a disease, you could potentially spread that to others using your gloves or your equipment. So it's really important for biosecurity that we clean our materials and we don't take tools from one yard to another to ensure that we don't spread diseases. So beyond the smoker, I have a hive tool, which is this long kind of stick. It helps me to break apart the wax that's holding a lot of the frames together. And they love to use propolis, which is a bee cement that they put in because they don't like things to move once they put them in a perfect place. So the bee tool helps me to leverage and to prop out some of the materials inside the hive. And then I also have a small brush to help me brush the bees away if I need to see something, as well as a honeycomb pick that helps take off the top layer of the comb so I can access the honey more easily. And like I said before, there's lots of different shapes of veils. People use those veils to protect their faces and to keep the bees from occupying their face. But for the most part, when you have docile bees, they often do not, they don't sting you. They just come up and say hello and then they go back to the hive. I also have a picture here of medications, talking about medicating bees, diseases, as well as pests. One of the things that beekeepers have to do today because of climate change, changing effects within the ecosystems, as well as different diseases that are brought in from importing bees from different areas, we have to make sure that our bees are healthy and that we're not passing along diseases to other local pollinators or other honeybees that are in different yards. So here I'm treating the bees for, you can see these large strips. I'm treating them for varroa mites. It's kind of like lice for bees. They all get it. Everybody has to deal with it, but we try to eliminate the mites as much as possible because they're vectors of disease and they can cause the colonies to collapse or die. And I also treat them with a little bit of icing sugar and antibiotics for American foul brood disease, which unfortunately we're seeing more commonly in Ontario today. And if the bees do catch this disease, they will unfortunately die. And it's very transmittable. So we try to contain that through early prevention by giving them antibiotics and preparing them for that type of disease. But who lives in the hives? We talked about the equipment, what beekeepers do a little bit, but really the stars of the show are the insects that live inside of the hive. And so if we're watching a hive and listening for a hive, what are we seeing when we come up to a hive? This is a, in the middle of the summer activity. They're buzzing around the entrance. You can see some bees are hanging out on the top there, watching other bees come in. And then heavy bees coming back into the entrance. Whoop, there's one by my camera, soaring back in, full of pollen and nectar, having a hard time because they're very heavy, but looking for that landing spot to come back into the hive. So you can see a few are coming in with pollen here, totally strapped to their legs. They've been out and busy and working. Others may be just full of nectar. Maybe some have been guarding the hive and they're just doing rounds around the outside of it. But this is the typical scene of what you would see when you approach a honeybee colony. But one of the most important members of the colony, and of which there is only one inside the hive, is the queen. And so the queen bee here, you can see she looks different than other worker bees that we'll talk about in a minute. She is much longer, larger. Her abdomen itself is used for the production of eggs and baby bees. So she has reproductive organs in this section of her body. And that distinguishes her from her daughters, who are the worker bees around her, by the very fact that she is the only one in the colony laying those eggs. So individually in each one of these holes or cells, she puts one egg into it throughout the day. And so she could lay in the height of the summertime months when it's warm, there's lots of flowers outside, the hive is in full production. She could lay up to 2,000 eggs a day. And that's part of the replacement process in the colony to keep it going. As bees are born, other bees that are doing harvesting outside the colony, they will start to die off. And so she's keeping the colony going by laying that number of eggs and keeping up the colony size and population. One of the things that, because there's only one of them and you can have up to 80,000 bees at the height of the summer, one of the things that beekeepers do is they will mark their queens. And so I do like to mark my queens with a little dot. It's water soluble, the marker, so I'm not hurting her and it's not anything permanent. So if she were to get wet, it would just wash off. But by putting this little dot on her back, I'm much better able to see her as she's crossing over those 10 different frames, just to check on her health, to make sure that she's laying eggs. And the most important thing for a beekeeper is just in finding the queen. If she is not there, if she has died, if she has left, the colony will collapse within a few weeks. And so it's really important that they have a healthy laying queen to ensure the success as a colony. But she's quick to move too. I have this little video that I took here of a queen moving around, and although she does not have a dot on her back, I haven't marked her yet, you can see how quickly she moves. And for the average beekeeper, if you're not watching really carefully for her, you could miss her. And she just pushes her way around, and whoop, there she goes on the other side of my frame, and I've lost her. So unless I have that little dot on her back, I might miss her in my hive check. So the queen, as I said, is the most important insect in the colony, but those thousands of worker bees that operate around her and who are her daughters, because she lays the eggs that they are born out of, and they are all female, these worker bees have jobs throughout the hive that they attend to throughout their lives. So this particular little bee that's here in the red circle that I'm using with my mouse here, this is a brand new bee that just hatched. And actually I'm pointing down to another brand new bee here that's super fuzzy, nice and light, and is actually emerging out of their cell. This is the first stage of their life as bees. They wake up, they come out of their cell, and immediately their first job is to turn around and clean their room, the exact cell that they came out of. So the work starts right away for these bees, but eventually they will graduate through their jobs of first cleaning their house, cleaning their cell. Other little new bees that are here will also attend to the queen. They will feed her. They will also feed new larvae and pupae before they are closed. And eventually they'll graduate to jobs of harvesting and going out into the world to forage for honey and nectar, or sorry, for nectar and pollen that they would turn into honey. So they have a lot of responsibility. And if there aren't enough worker bees to carry out all of those jobs, it's just as important that we recognize that if there's not enough workers, there isn't a colony, and unfortunately it could collapse. So again, it's super important to have lots of really good, strong worker bees in the colonies as well. Then we have the drones, and the drones play a special role in the colony. Not only are they the only male bees that live within a honeybee colony, but they are also really important to, of course, to breeding and to expanding the genetics of honeybees. And so their primary role is to breed with queens from other colonies and to spread their genetics, right? Honeybee drones are special too because they don't have a stinger. They are incapable of stinging you. So if you can recognize the difference between a honeybee and a drone in the wild, you can actually pick up or talk to a drone bee a little bit more closely maybe than you would a worker bee that has a stinger, because they're much more docile and don't have the ability to sting you. So this little bee had no problem hanging out on my hand here, but of course wanted to go back to his colony afterwards. The other way that you can tell it's a male bee, he's quite a bit bigger than the worker bees. He's got this big fuzzy body, but he has these enormous eyes as well, much bigger than his sisters or the queen bee. So you usually look for the eyes when you're looking at the drones. Let's see here. Yeah, there he is again. You see those big fluffy eyes looking back at me. There you go. Sweet little drone. All right, Monica or Rosie, if I could have you turn on the chat again. I think we should play a little bit of I Spy, because beekeepers need to be on their toes to be able to identify the queen. So I've got two pictures here of queens on frames, and I would love to know if people can see and identify the queen on their own. Don't give it away to other people. Just let us know if you see her.
I did put the chat on, so you should be able to say if you see her in the chat.
Where's she at? Yeah.
Did you move a slide forward? Are we still looking at
that? I moved a slide forward. It should be.
Is this the one we're trying to find the queen in?
Yes, this is the one you're trying to find the queen in. This is a brood frame with worker bees, a queen. You can see those closed capped brood, or the pupae, or the bees that are in their metamorphosis or transformation stage to becoming bees. Oh, Monica, you're too quick. You're a beekeeper. You know where that queen is. What about other people? Does anyone else see her? I see lots of new bees. I spy with my little eye a large abdomen in comparison to the workers. Rena thinks she sees her. Anyone else? Where's the queen bee?
Is it also a different color than the other abdomens or just longer?
It can be a different color. I have seen what I would describe as tortoise shell, honey dip. Sometimes they don't have the stripes of the worker bees. Sometimes they're just solid. Yeah, she really does blend in my opinion, in this one. She's a bit hard to see. Okay, we'll give you a couple more seconds. And then I'm going to show you exactly where she is. And you can give yourself a pat on the back, or maybe give you a bit of an idea of what you'd be looking for in the next slide. So here we go. Let's see. Were you right? Ta-da! Here she is. You can see, I think that was a great question that you asked, Rosie. Yes, she's a little bit different looking, right? Not only is her abdomen longer, but she's actually missing all of those stripes that her daughters have, the worker bees. But like I said, again, all queens are unique. So they might have slightly different patterning or coloration. So beekeepers get to know what their queens look like and their unique qualities for sure. All right, let's try one more. It's gonna look the same, but I promise you it's different. Can you find the queen?
I still see the same slide with the bee circled already. Oh, here we go.
Okay.
Oh, you already circled them.
I know. I apologize. I'm not sure why, but I'm doing it. Have this automatic advance, so I realize I'm giving some pieces away here. Is that a little bit better? Now I'll show you where she is. There. So similar to the last one, we've got this longer abdomen. This one happens to be honey colored, so she's really a little bit easier to spot. But if you're out here and they're all moving, they're all buzzing, and you saw how quickly that queen moved in the first slot, or the first images that I'd shared, it's very easy to lose her. So this is one of my favorite challenges. This is one of my favorite challenges as a beekeeper, is to play this game of where's the queen? But why do we need bees and other pollinators? What is so important about it? Other than our fascination with bees, why do we need pollinators? Let's think about that. And while we're thinking about it, I've got a little video here that I would love for you to not only to watch, but if you want to close your eyes and just listen to the sounds of honeybees, let's just absorb that experience for a second. Let me see if I can turn it on for us. This particular image in the video here, I've actually just used the smoker on the bees, and you can see that they've all rushed to the hive to collect that honey because they have been triggered to think that their colony is on fire. And so they're more interested in the honey right now than they are me, who's poking through looking for the queen and other signs of health. But I just love that sound of the bees. You can hear the crickets in the background. You can even hear the cows in the distance as well. But this is a really meditative space for me, and one of the reasons that I personally enjoy beekeeping. But why else do we need these pollinators? What's so special about them? And who else is in the garden with them, right? It's not just honeybees that are up at wintergreen. We have lots of other friends that are within the garden spaces as well. Many of you heard that fantastic talk this morning as a part of the Land Arts BioBlitz on bumblebees. And I see so many bumblebees in my own backyard, in the apiaries and up at wintergreen that work really closely with the honeybees to collect their own pollen and nectar reserves. And they work not together, but they work simultaneously and in the same space with very little disruption of each other. There's also moths and butterflies. Let's not forget the flies that are here as well. These are all insects that contribute to our environment and our ecosystems and are great partners in pollination. And I do mean they share. Honeybees, although they are very territorial about their space, they know the difference between friend and foe. And it's not uncommon for me to see honeybees sharing their space a little bit once in a while with bumblebees, although eventually they'll kick this bumblebee out for freeloading and eating all of their honey. They are gentle to one another when they're considered to be friends. But I've also seen honeybees who are encountered by wasps, and wasps are natural predators of many honeybees. I've seen the honeybees beat up and kick out those wasps as they try to enter the hive. So it's really a system around who is friend and who is foe. But let's think about those pollinators a little bit more, right? What is important about them to our ecosystem? Why should we support them? And what can we be doing to get these pollinators in the best shape for our futures, right? Let's see. The bees need flowers and flowers need the bees. And so one of the great symbiotic relationships that exists in our backyards, in our ditches, in our forests is that need for flowering plants, right? There we go. And so if you have the ability to plant more flowers, to think about planting flowers in sequence, ones that would open up very early in the spring, as early as dandelions, tulips, all the way through to the very last flowering plants of the fall, it's important to plant flowers that will bloom at different times so that we're not creating deserts for bees as well in times that, you know, we might not have any flowering plants in our backyard, and therefore it wouldn't be a good ecosystem for our pollinators to visit. So we want to keep getting them to come back to our spaces by planting flowers that will bloom or rebloom throughout the course of the summer. We also need bees for up to 70% of the food that we eat. These pollinators ensure our food security. And so I'm sure you can think of lots of things in your own refrigerator or the grocery store that you love, that you can't live without, that the whole reason you have them is because of honeybees or other pollinators in those spaces. So I've got a slide in a minute that's going to show us some of the things, some of that 70% that we have in our fridge that would go away if we lost pollinators in our ecosystems. But for now, just think in your mind, what's your favorite fruit? What's your favorite vegetable? Could you live without those items? Well, if we don't have bees, we might have to. What else do we need to support pollinators? Well, we need to ensure that we're creating a safe space for them. And so that might mean using fewer pesticides and letting your grass grow. I live in an urban center of Kingston. And one of the things that really makes me nervous every year is when I hear and see one of two things. One, I hear lawnmowers going off because I often hear them on Saturdays at 11 o'clock in the morning or in the early afternoon. And that's prime time for pollinators to be out. And so I'm always nervous when I hear weed whackers or lawnmowers, because I know those are disrupting the spaces of pollinators and it might scare them away from coming back. We also want to leave those weeds in our grass. Dandelions are the first food for pollinators in the spring. And as we know, our springs are pretty volatile. It can be warm one day and it can be cold the next. And so we have to make sure that there's food sources available for those bees, because if they don't, when they wake up in the spring and they become more active, they might starve in the early parts of the spring, even though it's nice weather, because we haven't left enough food sources for them. Pesticides on our grass too, that's poison for the bees. And even though we see lots of signs for safe organic pesticides, it's still a poison. And so bees will accumulate that poison in their systems and eventually die if we are not treating our own ecosystems better and removing the use of pesticides, and especially around areas with pollination. So what can you do as a supporter of the pollinators, a pollinator champion, a beekeeper, maybe in your own right, aspiring beekeeper for the future? You can always buy local honey and support a local beekeeper. Having local honey from your own ecosystem, from your own environment, is really good and supportive for your own health as well as your local economy. You can plant those pollinator-friendly gardens. right? So in the last presentation that we heard, pollinator gardens are those spaces that you carefully curate and design for having different types of flower species to attract different types of pollinators and support their progress. And so you can make those in your own backyard, your front yard. Maybe you work with a local community organization or your church to make a pollinator garden. There's lots of ways that we can enrich our own spaces with these beautiful flowers as well as those for pollinators. Support honeybee research. Rosie was kind enough to invoke my alma mater of University of Guelph, where I did my undergrad. And I was so lucky to take classes with the Honeybee Research Center, where I got to learn about beekeeping, bee biology, the impacts on the local environment. And those were just my elective courses. So there's lots of free and online resources right now to learn about beekeeping, to become a beekeeper yourself, or even a master gardener to create those pollinator spaces. So any chance you get and you want to, join into some research or take some educational classes on how you can better your space. And last but not least, for those of you who are interested, become a beekeeper. There's lots of folks that are joining our guild today that are young. There are people that are retired that are joining as well. Beekeeping knows no age restriction, knows no class, no different race or ethnic or creed. Beekeeping is a space for everyone, so long as you enjoy working with insects and you enjoy contributing to your local environment. So there's lots of organizations like local beekeeping guilds who are easy to join and learn from other beekeepers through mentoring programs and just getting started on your own. But here's some of those foods. So 100% of the foods like broccoli, cauliflower, onions, nuts, blueberries, cherries, they're 100% dependent on those honeybees or pollinators. And then we also have, asparagus, apples, carrots. Now, more rare, of course, would be some things like watermelon, as well as pears and strawberries or raspberries. But it's important to recognize that if we didn't have bees pollinating these spaces, we would see a lot less of these pieces in the grocery stores. And yes, Monica, I'm sorry, your broccoli would go away if we did not have bees. So it's so important that we keep them happy, because without them, we too would perish. So let's keep our dandelions in the grass. Let's think about different flowers and crops that we can be planting in our own spaces, and appreciating the beauty of not only those honeybees, but other pollinator species as well. So let's turn it over now to doing some of your burning questions about beekeeping or bees or pollinators more generally, so that we can continue this conversation. I'll look over to the Q&A now to see if anybody has some of those burning questions. And I should thank you too, everybody. I appreciate when you take an interest in honeybees and bee research and pollinator spaces. It's so exciting to see so many people engaged in this topic.
Thank you, Alex. That's great. Super interesting. I loved all your close-up shots of the bees. So there are a few questions in the Q&A that some might want to know the answers to. Monica and Rena have answered some of them, but Hilo asked, are smokers bad for bees?
I think that's a fair question, and a good one too, right? Obviously, I'm playing a little bit of trickery with the bees, because I'm obviously not setting the hive on fire, but I'm giving them smoke signals to indicate that there's a problem. So as a beekeeper, I try not to do this very often. I might smoke the hive once with 1 or 2 puffs at the very beginning, just to give them that signal. But then in the future, I won't keep smoking them if I'm in the bee hive for a long period of time. And I will only bring it with me at the very beginning, right? So I try not to over trigger them and to balance the use of my smoker so that it doesn't cause them harm. The only harm that it might cause is it might trigger them to say, hey, my house is on fire a lot. I might be living in the wrong location. And so if they're displeased with me using this, all they might do is actually pick up shop, take as much honey as they can, and leave and find another place for their colony. So it's important for me as a beekeeper not to smoke them out to leave the neighborhood. What else? What else are you thinking about?
Well, I have a question while we're waiting for other people to maybe put more questions in the chat. That was a pretty tricky, the quiz that you gave us. I'm just curious, like on a personal level, how long did it take you to be able to recognize the queen and find the queen? I mean, it seems like kind of a something that you would get better at over time. Am I right?
I hope that I get better over time. I will say that I took a lot of time with my mentor spending hours when we would check the hives just to look for the queen. And that was such an important part of my training, was to take that time and experience to keep looking for her, even if I missed. And so when my mentor would start with me, she would pick up a frame, analyze it, and then hand it off to me and say, "What do you see?" And she wouldn't tell me if the queen was on the frame or not. So it was a bit of a challenge, but I'd like to think I get better, but and Monica can attest to this too, there are days when we open up the hives and she's just going to hide and would prefer not to be found. And on those days, we just know we're going to be out of luck.
Great, thank you. So we do have another question.
Great.
How small a hive could one begin with?
Oh, that's great. Yes. Most beekeepers, when they start beekeeping, they start with what's called a nuke. A nuke is a smaller version of a full Longstroth hive, right? Remember those 10 frames? A nuke hive is 4 frames. So it would come with a queen, it would come with worker bees, and a whole bunch of brood that is going to hatch. So that colony might only be 6 months to 8 months old. So it's very newly established. The queen is quite young. But you might be getting in a nuke up to about 2,000 bees to start off with, and it would expand over the summer. That's a good size to start with because they're pretty stable at that point, and their only expectation would be to grow. If you started with anything smaller than a nuke or 4 frames and you're an inexperienced beekeeper, you might inadvertently do something that might cause the colony to struggle or maybe to decline in its numbers. And so that I would advise against starting with anything smaller than a nuke. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions right now. There was a question about how many bees live in a beehive, but Rena reminded the person asking it of all the things that you had mentioned in that one slide. Sometimes the numbers go by quickly and it's nice to have repeated, but yeah, it's pretty astounding to know that they grow to be that large. It's pretty incredible.
They're really big. And one of the things I didn't get to chat about, but when we're talking about colony size and that in the Longstroth hives that we have, what happens when they run out of room, right? 80,000 bees is a lot in a particular space. And so what I mentioned earlier is that, if I were to agitate them too much with a smoker, or if they run out of room, either to lay eggs in the colony or store honey, they will actually leave, right? If I'm not providing the essentials as the beekeeper, they'll pick up their house and they will go somewhere else. So as a beekeeper right now, it's swarm season. And this is the time of year in the spring that beekeepers have to be on their toes, because if we're not providing the essentials for these bees, they might split in half, create a new queen who would take half of the colony with her to another location. Or they might just pick up altogether with the existing queen and say, I think we can do better. Let's find an expanded renovation space and see what we can do. So yeah, beekeepers have got to watch it this time of year.
It takes a lot to know the behavior of the bees. So there's another question here.
Is that a pun, Rosie? The behavior?
Oh, the behavior, yes. So another question here. How long does it take for a queen to emerge from a queen cell?
Oh, what a great question. So scientific.
From Monica.
Oh, Monica, thank you. It takes 16 days. And I know that because I'm currently trying to hatch a few queens in my own colonies right now, as I'm attempting to do some bee breeding of my own. So queens, because of their large size, they end up having a bigger cell to develop in that's specially built just for them. And so worker bees, in order to create that queen, will feed her special royal jelly that only the queen gets to eat. If they fed this royal jelly to any of the worker bees, it might actually start to develop some of those organs that we talked about for laying eggs. So they try to only feed it to the special bee that they know is going to turn into a queen. And this royal jelly helps to trigger that metamorphic process. So that larger cell that houses the queen only takes 16 days for her to have that transformation and to emerge and either to fight the existing queen, because there can only be one in the colony, or she might take a more peaceful approach and just call all of those bees who want to move with her and take those bees with her in a swarm and exit the colony. Worker bees take 21 days. And I think drones only take about 19 to 20. So it takes a longer amount of time for a worker bee to go through its metamorphic process than it does for a queen bee, which is always amazing to me because I think the queen has a lot more going on necessarily than the worker bees, but they're quicker to emerge. And that I think might be an emergency capacity for the cells or for the colonies as well, because without the queen, they would perish.
Okay, well, thank you so much. There's still so much more to know. We are running out of time because soon we will be going to another webinar that follows this one. So I wanted to say thank you so much, Alex, and thank you for everyone for coming and asking questions and being a part of it. I am going to share my screen now and remind those that are coming up that we have another webinar coming up shortly that I wanted to show you how to come to. So here we are. We are finishing up with Alex, and we're going to get a really fascinating tour next of the Sandy Plains Wildlife Center. So you can get the link here on the website. And I also wanted to let everyone know that when you sign off, we're going to have a short survey of about 4 questions about this webinar that you've just joined us for. So it would be great if you would fill that out and send it to us. And also check out the website. There's a bunch of other things going on, like other activities that you can do in your classroom, as well as you can download and do at your home. Lots of different land art activities and self-guided hikes. You can see the whole list. And I wanted to let everyone know that we're hoping to be able to have a in-person session, a family day on June 19th. Now that of course depends on provincial regulations, but stay tuned and press this register now button to let us know that you're interested in attending that, and we will keep you up to date. So thank you everyone for being a part of this, and I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll hopefully see you on our next webinar to come. So thank you, Alex. Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much. Take care.